Welcome to episode 26 of the Critical Fools podcast. This week we'll be just reviewing Kingdom of Heaven, a 2005 film directed by Ridley Scott. The quick synopsis of this film is of a young blacksmith who he's faced some personal trauma, and he's thrusted into kind of like his own journey of salvation. Going to the Kingdom of Heaven, as the title of the film is. In the 12th century, and he's also thrust, and I guess the main kind of like big storyline is that he's thrusted also for not for his like intention, and a lot of politics and kind of like the world that is that time period, the Crusades, and I'll leave it at that. I'm actually curious about your like high level thoughts before we go back to the beginning where it's it's set in France, and what you thought of the film overall, as a period piece too. So.
Sure. I mean, so this film is an epic, much like some of the long quests of, say, like Lord of the Rings or any of the Star Wars series. It's sort of along that same type of film. I thought it was good. I thought some of the cinematography was just tremendous in this film, and it was really fully fleshed out for the. This is specifically we're reviewing the director's cut. I have not actually seen the movie that was released in theaters back in 2005, the original version. But from the director's cut, I can say I was thoroughly impressed. Most of the plot lines seem to be more fully fleshed out in this film, based on reviews that I've read, and I didn't have any issues with that. I thought that, I guess just high level, the acting was very good. It was a cast that was just loaded, where you had, say, Orlando Bloom, Eva Green, Jeremy Irons, Liam Neeson. It was just quite a tremendous cast that they were able to cast for this film. Overall, just in terms of sort of pacing, tone, I thought they did a pretty good job with this movie.
Yeah, I was going to say you only watch a director's cut, and even though it's a bit long, I did feel the length at times when I rewatched it. The story flows a lot better than the non-director's cut, which is why I suggested we watch the director's cut, because it would have been too choppy.
From everything I've read, because I was kind of curious, there was a lot of criticism of the original cut.
Yeah, a lot. And we'll get into maybe at the end of this episode about like the dangers of the gray line between studios and directors and writers, and
yeah, I'm sure.
And this happens.
And producers.
This happens a decent amount. So unfortunately, but yeah, I agree with all of your points. Where I think, if there were like more movies of this ilk, because I have some issues with this film in general, but if there was more films of this ilk, I would even be a harsher critic. But because this is not something that is greenlit a lot, because probably the budget, just to get all the, make the setup and the get it kind of realistic with like, the setting, as well as like I think there's less of an appetite for these kind of movies these days. It seems like if you look in general, the last like 4 years, right, we're not seeing a lot of these kind of like grand scale,
It depends what you mean. I would say the one of the films of this type that do come out, they all tend to be sort of Marvel epics.
That's true. I guess I view it as more like the because I think
you're talking about like non superhero epics. Yeah, I agree.
Or non CGI heavy, because I think I think there's other movies which I don't know if I'll bring to the podcast, but I've seen like the King, and then there's a film that came out recently about Robert Bruce, or Scottish king himself. There's been films, but like those, you can see that those set pieces, like if you've watched those, it's not the same as like let's say Lord of the Rings, this film. Like it seems like there was an appetite to have kind of like great like sets where you would have basically a lot of extras, and gives you that realism. And there's other films too, like there's a film like by a Russian director called Waterloo in the 70s, where he recreated that battle, and he recreates it with like actual people, and like has it look exactly how it would have looked back in the day. But I think now, to your point, these big budget movies, they prefer something that's more CGI based, more like you said, special effects.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think the last, I guess, epic that I really saw that was outside of like a superhero movie, at least of recent years, was probably The Revenant.
Yeah.
That's like the only one I could think of recently.
I guess when I think of like this type of film, I think what I kind of categorize it with.
Kind of period piece.
Also, why I said Lord of the Rings. No, it's more about like how like they like if you look at how they make those movies. If you do like those like I don't have the DVD version of Kingdom of Heaven, but I did watch all the extras of Lord of the Rings. Like the costumes, like all the extras, those cost a lot of money and time because they have to reshoot. And studios now don't want to do that often, right? They want, hey, we have a tight shooting schedule. Let's get it all done. Let's get the edits in. Let's get the movie out. Let's make the money, right? And actually, even while we're doing this podcast, COVID has changed a lot of how films are being distributed, and and how important it is for these studios to make a lot of money off the ROI of these movies. Like I guess everybody should know this by now, but I think Warner Brothers has decided to not just release movies in theaters, but also at the same time for 30 days, also release it on their streaming service, HBO Max. So let's say you're waiting for the next Wonder Woman. You're going to be able to watch it at home, or if you choose to in theaters. Now,
right.
I don't want to sidetrack our podcast, but it shows. I'm just trying to show evidence that these studios really only care about ROI, and they don't really care that much about artistic quality. And
and I think big budgets are, especially in the wake of COVID, like you were talking about, are sort of just going to be slashed quite a bit, because a lot of a lot of these studios are competing with, say, like you were talking about, Netflix and all of these other streaming services that are putting out their own original content, and they put out like decent budgets, but it's nowhere near the like huge, insane blockbuster budgets that we were used to like in the early 2000s.
Yeah. So rewinding back to the beginning of this film, because there's some interesting early scenes with Balian, who is, for reference, is the character that Orlando Bloom portrays. So I was curious about like what did you think of those early scenes about him being like a normal blacksmith and being the byproduct of let's say a out of wedlock affair, and then also how his wife had passed away because of his child dying, and then how his own supposed brother treats him.
Yeah, so I mean, it was Balian is supposed to represent. I mean, he's the sort of hero, the archetype of your sort of true hero in this movie. And when you first introduced him, he's still mourning and grieving. I don't remember exactly how much time had passed since his wife had passed away, but he's mourning and grieving essentially the destruction of his family because his child passed away and his wife took her own life. At least that's what you're told. And so he's just left sort of moping. He doesn't really. It's one thing I always found interesting, and is he doesn't really react, and it really pisses some of the religious hierarchy there off, because they think that based on his actions that it comes off that he thinks he's better than them, and that like really irritates the local town priest. And so it was, it was interesting, but what I didn't realize that I don't know if that's true or not, like historically speaking, that if you committed suicide, they'd chop your head off, like they behead you, which I just found interesting, and I didn't know that much that aspect of Europe during that time period. But you're introduced to Balian, and he's sort of the righteous character who always tries to do sort of the right thing. But in many ways, he kind of resembles Jesus in that way, because he doesn't really react, right? Because this is a theme with like religious overtones, obviously, because it's set in the Crusade. So he never really reacts, except when he's told that, or the priest tells him that his wife, he ordered his wife's head to be chopped off, essentially. And then he reacts kind of in the way that you think biblically Jesus did react once angrily when people desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. So in many ways, I kind of sort of mirrored or mimicked that.
Yeah. Yeah, I found like the early like setup to be like kind of like because every story needs like a beginning push, as I call it, and it was kind of like his motivations. Like they needed to create a motivation for him to go to Jerusalem, right? So like even though it could have easily been written that like, oh, I'm a religious fanatic and I want to go, but they wanted to create some kind of like
but they also wanted
tie. Yeah.
Well, they all wanted to set Balian apart from the rest of the people who were just there for really power and money. This was some of the big reasons for going over to the Crusades.
Yeah. So Yeah, and so what'd you think of his? I guess his newly found father, which is played by Liam Neeson.
It was just interesting. I think that I mean, I didn't have an issue with Liam Neeson's acting in this film. I thought it was good, and the storyline was believable in that he only goes to his father once he's killed the priest, because otherwise he'd just be taken for murder, right? So he had to go flee, and he decided to take his newly found father's offer to go fight in the Crusades for Jerusalem.
Yeah, I also liked the opening battle. I thought it kind of
Are
gave
you
you a
talking about
glimpse.
when they try they're sent to retrieve Balian?
Yeah, like it gives
Yeah.
you a sense of like how this how the battles will be filmed in this, and it was
Hmm.
well done.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was. I mean,
yeah,
the action sequences in this film were really good. But I
yeah.
mean, that's kind of what you. Sorry
Yeah,
to cut you off. I'll just last point. That's kind of what you expect from Ridley Scott's films, though. I've seen like
yeah,
Black Hawk Down and so are others. The action sequences are always good in them.
that's true. Yeah, also like with the director's cut, there's those extra scenes where I can't remember his character's name right now. Oh, Godfrey goes to talk to his brother, and like already like his nephew and brother are conspiring to basically take his lands once he dies because he has no official heir at the time, but he obviously adopts in a sense Balian to be his heir to his lands in Jerusalem.
Hmm.
And they he obviously Godfrey gets injured, and like that's also what propels him to be in like, because if he had just gone with his, I feel like if this is all like probably story changes they made because it's loosely based on characters, right?
Hmm.
If Godfrey had lived, right, it would have been a totally different story. So he gets injured and then he passes, and so that propels Balian to be now in the world of politics, which he's
Yeah,
not
well,
he's not very suited for.
yeah, he's inherited his father's position.
Yeah. So okay. So before they actually get to Jerusalem, they stop at a port. I
Hmm.
forgot what port actually. Do you recall?
Not entirely. I can't remember exactly.
But you know
Oh,
what port
is
I'm.
it Messina?
It's probably Messina, right? Or some.
Yeah,
It's like,
Messina.
and that's where some interesting scenes happen there, right? You have the scene with the beach. You also have the first introduction to Guy. So in that backdrop, what did you think of that? Because I know there was probably a lot of thoughts around a lot of the scenes and lines in that particular scene because it portrays a certain
Yeah.
world that may not be as realistic as
So
people.
this was a very long film, so there might be some scenes that we're just like forgetting it sequentially. You're talking about when all of the politicians are around the table, right?
No, go back earlier. So before,
Which part? Sorry,
so
it's a
so
long film.
okay, there's a battle, right? Not Guy. Godfrey gets hurt, right? And they're
Hmm.
traveling to Jerusalem, right? But before
Oh yeah, yes.
they stop at
I
the
think I remember.
port, right? They stop at the
Uh-huh.
port, and that's where you first meet Guy, right? He tells Godfrey, because he's still alive, right? He tells him, "Hey, I wish I'd met you, or I'd fought with you when you were still making bastards." And they make that, back and forth lines. And Godfrey says,
Right.
"I knew your mother's when she was making hers." That was a good one.
Yeah.
But there was that
It was
scene.
funny. There was a lot of witty lines in this movie,
Yeah,
which are obviously always there usually is with like sort of these type of period pieces for some reason. At least when we're filming them.
and I think and I guess the specific scenes I wanted to pluck was like there's that scene. I should remind you that this is before they actually Balin gets on the ship and the ship crumbles.
Hmm.
He talks to I guess the monk, the warrior monk, right? I forgot who's his character's name, but it's
Yep.
I think if I just say that should click. And they talk about oh no, actually it's not the warrior monk, it's the other knight that's actually in Rome, and also he was in Train Spotting too, actually. If you recognize his face, he was
I
the
think so.
friend.
Yeah.
But they talk about how like because Balian is confused as to why they're letting all the Muslims pray to Mecca on the beach when there's
Hmm.
clearly a war supposedly going on, or conflict. And he tells them that like this is we're basically they say like a very idealistic take on the
This is
on the Middle
this
East.
is an incredibly idealistic period piece.
Yeah, and so he tells them like basically like the it's not perfect, but like we're trying to build a better world, and and stuff like that. I'm just curious because like these lines, I was rewatching, I was just like, wow, this is like so idealistic. Like I was like, okay.
Yeah, we'll get more. We should cover like a lot of the scenes that were more interesting, at least some of the more crucial scenes in the plot, and then we'll get more into like some of my criticisms with the film at that point, because that sort of conversation that's gonna probably be a little longer.
Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's the first actually part of the movie where we're introduced to basically non-Christians.
The Islamic world. Yeah.
Yeah, it's at this point.
I mean, it was interesting. You could tell. And this goes to some criticism that this film faced for not being incredibly historically truthful. They sort of idealized the the Islamic world as being fairly peaceful during this time period, and they just portrayed all the Knights Templar and anyone who went to go fight in the Crusades as absolute savages, which is true to a great extent. However, like there was a lot of brutality and that was stemming on both sides during that war. It's not like it was completely peaceful, or like it's not like it was completely one-sided, one way or the other, right? There was a lot of conflict during that time, and I don't believe that from what I've read, that it was 100% like people living in harmony as the film would want you to necessarily believe, right? I think that's sort of commentary that the director, Ridley Scott, was trying to convey in that, this is sort of the world that we should be striving to live in, which is fine. I just don't like the necessarily because there's no subtlety about that sort of message, just kind of in your face, very preachy. And I'm not a big fan of films that, sort of shove a preachy message down your throat in that way. I think I tend to enjoy films with a lot more subtlety, which is something I've said like throughout our recordings of different podcast reviews.
Yeah. So then he gets on the ship, right, and it there's a storm, and so he ends up on the beach and traveling through the sand, and he fights the at the time you think it's a Muslim aristocrat, but it's really like it was the other way around, right? It was the slave, and the other guy was the aristocrat. And obviously his decision. So what I find interesting in this film is that all his decisions, big decisions, do have effect. So I'll give the film credit in terms of story structure, because sometimes there's films where they're good, but then you see like there's decisions that didn't even matter in the end, or they just get forgotten because they're just moving the story along.
There's some scenes that also seem inconsequential at first, and then they become very consequential later on.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Where I give the film credit is that like I thought like as you're moving through, you're like, oh, this actually they connected many ways, like earlier things to later, good or bad, right? Sometimes it was to his benefit, and sometimes it was not to him or the people he was trying to help's benefit. But and there's this. We'll get to this scene where I think there was a scene in the film where I think tries to like really, I don't want to say be nuanced, but like really push what this film's about. But
I know exactly what scene you're getting at.
Yeah, it's my favorite scene in the movie too.
I know.
But anyway, so he battles his lord, right? So I'm trying to get us to like where it gets interesting, because I feel like the movie really picks up when he gets to Jerusalem himself.
Even before that, there's a key scene that you don't, like you said, there's some scenes that seem inconsequential, but they end up coming back and really helping the story along. But it's especially like when he first washes up shore and he finds his horse in the desert, and then he's confronted by someone who's a sultan at that point, who's Muslim, and he says that he's taking his horse, and so then they have to fight for it, and he kills the sultan because he's it's all survival, and then the person who is apparently the slave says, okay, because you won, now that you've killed my master, now I'm your slave. And he's like, no, I don't believe in that. He's like, all I want to know is basically where to go to, how to get to Jerusalem. And so then they get to Jerusalem, and then he gives him his horse. He's like, no, you can do whatever you want with it. Basically, he showed him kindness at that point, because Balian is supposed to represent sort of the good, that person who always does sort of the right thing. In a world where people are just driven by sort of greed and self-service.
Yeah, he's supposed to represent when you think of the Crusades, you usually think of like, unless you're really digging into the, your study, like you're a historian of this period, but most mainstream narrative is like either it was, corrupt, like it was malintent, or they were just fanatical. But I think, I mean, I didn't live in that time, but I have a feeling that there's always a partial truth to both, but there's also many people who are probably, they went to believing they were trying to reach their own
some were manipulated by the church.
Yeah, either manipulated or even those who were just like with Balin's case, right? He was trying to seek his own personal story too, and it just somewhat intertwined with the local region.
Well, yeah. Oh, what happened is it was part redemption for Balian as well.
Yeah, because remember he goes to the first stop he does after he does when he, like you said, he gives the horse to the supposed slave. When it was the other way around. Is that he goes to where Jesus was crucified, supposedly, right, by historical records.
Yeah. He goes up to pray on the mountaintop.
Yeah, and he tells the other, when he reunites with the monk warrior, right? He says, "I can't hear God at all. I don't. I came all here. I haven't reached salvation yet. Or I haven't, because he wants to, not just for himself because he killed somebody, but also for his wife, because he does believe that suicide. You can tell that his undertone is that he believes that his wife is in hell because of the of what he's been taught, right? That if you commit suicide, you have wronged God. And so then he, I guess this is a scene just to move the plot around, right? Like other, basically Godfrey's soldiers or his men recognize his sword and they confront him, and then they bring him to his new land, right? And they test him with like, what color was his eyes and stuff like that, But yeah, I guess what did you think of that scene with the when he is like contemplating, like he doesn't find any solace and right away reaching Jerusalem.
He's really searching for meaning, right? Because a lot of what went on back in his hometown, that blew up with his family, and so then he's trying to find himself, find redemption. All of this through the Crusades, through going to Jerusalem, because it's the Holy Land. And at that point, he hasn't found it. And I think a lot of people can relate to that when they're down or things aren't going right. Tend to go to the church or look for meaning in some places, and you can't always find it when you just want it. It doesn't happen with a snap of the fingers like that.
I was gonna say a lot of people make that mistake, right? They go to certain holy sites, whether that's the Vatican, and they buy the rosaries, they donate, and they just at the end they were like, well, I still feel the same. Like I did all this. In the moment, maybe I feel, oh, I'm here, this historic place, but there's no substance. He's trying to find his own, like I guess, like you said, peace externally when they're journey. I think Bailey realized at the end that it's internal.
It's in the journey, dude.
Yeah, it's internal, but initially everybody, he does make the same mistake as many do, that if I do this or I go to X site, I will find. I'll hear basically I'll hear God and I'll be enlightened, when that's not. That's often not the case.
It's kind of like both you and I sort of grew up in the church, and I'm sure you and I have our qualms with it too. It was like years before this current pope, with Pope Benedict, it was a previous one. I remember, I think I was in high school at the time, but he basically made an order through the Catholic Church, declaring that if you went to the town of Lourdes, which has a holy site or two, then you were supposed to be given certain dispensation, which are like privileges for the world after. And I was just like, okay. I was like, that's a little like, one, I think just going to a certain place like that, that's not really going to do you much. And two, not everyone can afford to go to Lourdes just on demand to get your silly little Catholic dispensations, right? It's just very silly because a lot of these things are sort of politicized too.
Yeah.
So that but I know people who buy into that and do subscribe to that sort of thought process. It's like, oh, the Pope said it, so it must be true 100%.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that they do. The Pope's word is, because the Pope in general, at least in the Catholic tradition, is supposed to represent the closest thing to
God,
the voice of God. Yeah. Which is that's a whole other topic. Anyways,
never mind. Popes have covered up sexual abuse of some of their parishioners for hundreds of years. But we won't get into that.
And
Anyway.
I like how the church also showed up in the Panama Papers, but we won't get into that today.
Yeah, no, we won't.
Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, because I think that scene's also I like the scene because like I think it's like you said, it could connect to people, because I think a lot of people, even if they're not, let's say, Catholic, and they're, let's say, Episcopalian or whatever, I think it's similar, right? The dynamic of like, oh, if I just do this, if I just go to here, I can feel peace. And that
well, dude, it's within any sort of religious tradition. Think of the Islamic world; they all have to go to Mecca to make their pilgrimage.
Yeah.
I think they
have to do it at least once. So I think
once in their life. So I mean, a lot do it more if you're in that part of the world.
Yeah, but real quick side tangent. I saw a documentary about that, and actually, the people who are Muslim but don't look Arabic, there's a huge discrimination half the time. It's rough sometimes. So because they're not.
Are you that surprised?
I'm not surprised.
I mean, there's a lot of racism. That goes on between Arabic Muslims against Muslims that are African.
Yep, even that. Example. Right? So, yeah, so it's
100%. Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic, and
it's very interesting seeing that, like knowing that dynamic. Given 50 years ago when Malcolm X went to Mecca for his pilgrimage, and I think he didn't either see that or was oblivious to some of those dynamics because he's coming in from an American perspective.
Yeah, also what might have helped him is that he was probably well known, and that always, I've noticed that no matter what skin color you are, like if you're a big celebrity,
if you're famous,
that seems to be the great equalizer. Like it can still happen to these people, but it tends to be a little more covered up, because I have a hard time believing that they even didn't hear of him, because he was giving speeches at Oxford and stuff. So
everywhere, and if he's well known, being like, oh, and he's from America, which that time was probably very different.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. We weren't as like well known on the world stage, or as much as today, especially in that part of the world.
Yeah. So I think we're part of the story. We're actually introduced to Eva Green's character, who is the
wife of
Guy, and also at the time of this story, the mother of the future king of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And
I just wanted to get your quick take. What did you think of Guy's character? Because we were introduced to him earlier.
Oh, that's true. He was not maybe somebody I know, but because I'm telling you, I could take the lines and literally put it into the other person's mouth, dude.
Insert a mutual person of ours.
Yeah, I'm 100% almost heard like basically the paraphrase words of God wills it. It's like, I mean, seriously, I was just like, man, this hasn't gone away in 800 years, you know.
Oh no, yeah. I think so. Just going off that, I do think like quite a few of these sentiments that were expressed by people who were fighting in the Crusades from Europe, a lot of these people still hold these beliefs to be true in Europe.
Yeah, I agree. So,
like a lot of that sentiment hasn't gone away, despite the fact that these wars were fought over 800 years ago.
Yeah, it's the Holy Land, you know. It's an important. Even in America, we have our own people who will, no matter what, make sure they back certain countries. So,
you're talking about. Well, I mean, that's what we tended to. Well, really, the Western world decided they had a claim to that part of the Middle East after World War II, and we decided to just. It's really a really sad or tragic moment when no one really wanted to take a lot of the Jewish refugees, so they essentially just stuck them back into what is now Israel.
Yeah, and then they expanded. But anyways, yeah. So yeah, Guy's character, and there's many scenes, but yeah, our first introduction that he's basically arrogant, pompous, and he's a power player, right? But only later do we see that he really just tries to manipulate, like I said, the mission to his own benefit, and it costs him dearly. But that he has this ultimate ambition of being, a supreme ruler of the region, and there's only really two threats in the beginning of the movie, right? It's potentially his wife and his brother-in-law, and then Saladin. So once one is removed, we're jumping around a little bit. Once one is removed, he only focuses on the other one, and I mean that honestly, he makes some like mistakes where like I wanted to fact check this because I was like, if this guy actually did these mistakes, he had no business even.
You're talking Guy?
Yeah, I was like, you have no business even leading troops. Are you kidding me? Like they're telling you like basic 101.
Let's lead them into the desert.
Basic 101, like you learned this in like military school, like first week, dude. Like, oh yeah, maybe you shouldn't
stay near water.
But the in modern sense, you would say steer near your supply chains. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, oh, I want to march away from my supply. Like, okay, you should lose, dude. Are you dumb, dude? Like, but it's true that people forget that, like, all of these. If you look at especially the first Crusades, which I
but a lot of it was that they thought that they were God's soldiers.
Yeah, so
it was very silly. Was that? Hold on, just real quick. Was that actually true? Did he actually make that?
I haven't. I didn't.
Disastrous.
I have the feeling that it's not true, but I think it's there to show. I think that's probably influenced by like because I can see that this movie takes place in the second, but you can see that there's a lot of nitpicking of third and
of a lot of different of the Crusades, yeah.
Yeah, because in the first Crusade, like to your point, this is the Crusade that I think a lot of people are bewildered by because it was the most successful one because they ended up winning. But like, yeah, the tactics were terrible. It was like, you're right. Soldiers thought like they should just charge the gates because
God wills it.
God's chosen knights, right? And even when they did sieges, they were not strategic at all. And I think it only worked. My personal theory is that it only worked in the first Crusade because it was so unconventional that they thought that there was a genius behind the madness. You know, it's kind of like when you hear conspiracy theories. That there's a lot going on right now, by the way, where they think that like, oh, he's giving a speech in front of a hotel, it means something. And I think there was the mistake that I think they weren't ready. You know, they probably were not expecting the Crusade, right? It's the first one. And also these unconventional tactics of, oh, we're going to rush the middle. Oh, we're going to siege with no supplies. Like they probably thought like, no, they probably have supplies for years. There's no way they would do this. And so they would surrender and they end up winning. But I think Saladin realized, I think that's why he was able to win and eventually even defeat Richard the Lionheart in the Third Crusade. Or not defeat, but have a standstill.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least while he was like so successful in general, I think he recognized that a lot of his opponents were basically like his own fanatics. Where like there is no strategy. There was just we're the chosen ones. We have to win, you know. But with a little nuance and strategy, you actually.
But that's what makes you like a great leader, right? They don't just act reactionarily. They strategize, right? Even Saladin's advisors are like, why are we not? You promised we would take over Jerusalem. He's like, in due time. And he's like, this is not the right moment. Like, but he has to use the language of like, God does not will it at this moment.
Yeah.
Right. And it's always through that like lens.
When he really wants to say like, you understand that we siege this city and it's like we could be doing a siege for a long time and we don't have enough supplies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's he needs them to make the first mistake, basically, which they do. And like I said, we're jumping around. But if we go back to, again, the first scene that we're introduced to Eva Green's character, I thought her introduction was interesting because, like, I remember when I was first watching it ever, like, because that scene is also in the original cut. She gives you, like, you don't realize that she is that important until, like, she kind of, like, you get the feeling, right? Because she, rides in with her horse. But it seemed like from the beginning, like she says later in the movie that like she's always had her eye on Balian, and I'm curious to like I've always tried to decipher why. Is it because he's such an outsider himself, a blacksmith, and she's she only knows the world of luxury. I found that interesting too, like her character dynamic,
their relationship, or why she likes Balian.
Yeah, like their relationship, and also even her character. Like she makes some interesting.
I think she also likes that he is a more honorable person, despite coming from someone who's not of royalty. I mean, Guy is a scumbag, right? In many ways. Balian is the complete opposite, the antithesis of her husband, who's honorable. He has like a lot of integrity, despite the fact that she commits adultery with him. But aside from that, and I think she's attracted to the fact that he's a complete opposite of her husband.
Yeah, and so I guess the next scene I would, unless I'm skipping some, I probably am, is what you mentioned earlier, the dinner table one, right? Because it's his first time that he's going to meet. So yeah, I'll let you. I know you want. It was on top of your mind, so I'll let you take it from.
Sorry, because there's a lot of sequences. It's just one of them ones, like I said, stuck because that's the second time that you're introduced to Guy. The first was in Messina, And so at that point, they're eating, and I believe his wife comes to the table, and something sets off Guy. I can't remember exactly what, but he's mad, and he doesn't.
He's mad because Bailey's at the table, and he doesn't respect bastards. So.
Oh, is that it? Yeah. So he just from the get-go, he does not like Bailey. And plus, he's not of that world, right? Not of the elites.
He's a blacksmith.
So he's an outsider. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was
with a lot of skills.
And that's also where I think we're introduced to Jeremy Irons' character. Forgot the name, but he's another. So. Yeah, he's another like let's say aristocrat, Templar Knight type of figure, who's a little more, I think, jaded. Like it seems like he has principles and he was idealistic at one point, but he's jaded with all the politics probably of Jerusalem. But yeah, I think we learn. This is where we start slowly learning that like the King Baldwin, right, the King of Jerusalem, he had leprosy, and then they have probably my favorite scene in this movie where they have they play chess, and even though like it's just just there to probably as a prop, but like they discuss like
strategy.
That's just not the strategy, because I think that is like right after we discussed the castle strategy. And Balin shows off his its expertise as a blacksmith a little bit, having dealt with building equipment and helping fortify. But no, that's where he has the line where the famous, I think one of the famous lines in the movie about a father can claim a son, and life can be like very erratic and spontaneous, but in the end, when you die and you go and face judgment, this is literally one of my favorite lines where he says you won't be allowed to just say, doing good was inconvenient because, I was in these circumstances, or I needed to follow the tone. That, your actions and your actions alone will determine, how you're judged, which later, ironically, comes to bite. Like it goes back to what we said earlier, right? That like there's little important scenes or little scenes that do come back to bite or help characters later. Because like Baldwin will later present a choice to Balian about, we can get Guy out of the picture, but you have to make this immoral choice. And Baldwin, we'll get to that. We'll get to that point where Balian says no, because like you've told me earlier in this story that like my actions alone are mine, and I cannot face God and say it was inconvenient at the time to do good when a little evil would have. Which is very interesting, because when you read The Prince by Machiavelli, he's all about the small evils leading to the greater good. While like this is, I think, it's more Kantian / biblical in the sense that like there is once you have one bad seed, it's the whole apple is rotten. It's like the analogy I was taught as a kid, like once there's a little rotten in the apple, the whole apple is rotten. Yeah, I mean, I did grow up also
but you can always
Catholic culture. No, I was taught.
You can always cut up a little, which I've done many times. Cut up the little rotten part.
Yeah, I mean that's what I do when I want to eat it. But I was told like, no, the whole apple must go. It was an analogy for like one sin leads to like the corruption of the soul. So, when you learn Catholicism in the northern part of Spain, that's what they kind of teach you. So
I think that's what they teach you in a lot of conservative Catholic regions. However, it's not that I don't disagree with that. It's just that they push sort of this extreme.
My issue is not with that analogy and that message. Is that like, okay, you can say that fine to an individual, but then you don't say that to the institution. That's always been my problem.
It's hypocrisy. Are you kidding?
Yeah, it's always been my problem.
Dude, in our diocese, did I tell you this? I don't think you've been keeping up, but in the diocese we grew up in, they it was discovered by an investigative journalist that they purchased a $5 million home for priests to retire in.
No, you did tell me that. So.
And they had to sell it once this came to light, and there was a very big uproar in our hometown. And they just said, "Oh well." The bishop was like, "We just thought it would be a good investment." Like investment, you're not supposed to be in the business of making investments.
Yeah, well, we learned from the Panama Papers that they're definitely in the business of investments and tax avoidance.
Of course. Well, they don't pay taxes here in the U.S. Yeah. It's a religious exemption.
Yeah, and they don't pay taxes globally either.
Of course not. But they have their own bank, and they're making real estate investments, apparently.
Yeah. you gotta remember that the Vatican at one point had a very close relationship with the Medici family, and the Medicis were the bankers of Europe at one point. So
sure. I
you
mean,
you can only imagine the deals. Also, Medici became Pope at one point. So
of course, it was just pure corruption. I mean, even in Mexico, one of their big civil wars was over state versus the church because the church owned, I believe, 2/3 of all of Mexico at one point.
Powerful institution.
Yeah.
It's actually a very old and powerful institution too. I think it's only comparable probably to some of the Arabic countries actually, because most religions like they're either newer because of Martin Luther or after him, or they're or they're just they're not as organized. Like the Buddhists aren't as organized. Right? They don't have like global institutions that make power plays.
Well, neither are the Hindus, despite their large numbers as well.
Exactly. So, but the church has always been organized. I'll give them that. So, anyways, we were jumping around a little bit there, but yeah, like, what did you think of like the introduction of King Baldwin? I thought that was that's one of the more powerful scenes probably in this film.
Yeah, well, that's when you sort of introduced him and realized that. First, I was like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "Oh shoot!" Very quickly, I realized with this mask that he's a leper.
Yeah,
and then it's alluded to that too.
Yeah, and it's obviously eventually stated, but yeah, like the leprosy was not.
It was a problem during that time period.
Yeah, back then there was like it was seen as like if you got it, you were cursed. It was one of those things when obviously science would later tell like it's just it's a disease.
That's right, it's bacteria.
Yeah, and there's a way to mitigate and actually like prevent.
Honestly, I thought that leprosy today has been pretty much wiped out. But to my surprise, apparently it's still problematic in certain aspects of areas of Brazil.
Yeah, I think it's not like 100%. I was gonna say, I think a good thing you followed up with that second point because I was like, I think it's still around, but that we've just, I guess, the developer has done a really good job with like making sure that's like tampered down, kind of like what we did with measles. Except
just make sure you don't eat armadillo because they're carriers for leprosy.
What I was going to say was the measles is that like it's still important for us to keep it up, as in like because there's been spikes here and there because people don't get vaccinated, and we should all get vaccinated. I believe in vaccines. By the way, that's a little plug. Yeah.
I thought you said that you wanted Europe to take the vaccines first.
Well, that's just because that's a different situation. The measles vaccine is well tested and documented. Okay, the COVID vaccine. Well, I probably will take it in phase 4 or phase 5 whenever that's.
Of course.
But I'm also like, hey, we need to see more of the data. Yeah. But anyways, yeah, I liked the character. I thought even though you never see his face, I thought the actor who played him probably did a really good job in at least conveying.
So true. You do see his face at one point.
That's true, but I'm talking about most of the movie.
Post-mortem.
Where like he's actually moving and talking. I thought he did a good job with like his body language actually to convey his points and stuff. So,
I agree.
So I think around this time or right after, we're also introduced to Guy's friend. What's his name? Reynaud of. I'm gonna just say Reynaud because I can't say the last whatever he's from. But what did you think of Reynaud's character? He's throughout the movie kind of like the attack dog of Guy.
He's a vicious man, right? Who always thinks he basically justifies being Christian to justify sort of his actions, and he just views the Islamic world or people who are Arabic as pretty much like less than human, right? And so that's how he's able to justify, and this guy's just like bloodthirsty, basically, and so he'll do whatever. Him and Guy team up a lot, and they'll do whatever they can to advance the prospect of war. They're warmongers. Yeah.
Because you're right. Like I think there's some scenes after that big meeting with the King Baldwin, but I know that like what basically happens plot wise is Balin returns back to his land. He starts working his land, which is okay. That's just I feel like that was a bit too long there. Like I get it. Like he wants to not just treat his people like slaves and like just peasants. I like also how uncomfortable he is with like all the normalcies of the aristocrat. Like, oh, here's the towel. And like, should we bathe you? And he's just like, no, I'll bathe myself. Like, what is this? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be like him too. Leave me alone.
I don't know. I think I know people that would love to be bathed by a beautiful woman, dude. But basically, during that time while he's doing that, and obviously what is her name? I keep saying Eva Green, but like, what's her character's name?
Ooh, Sibyl?
Sybil, yeah. She comes by and they have that affair, like you alluded to earlier. But during this time is also when Guy and Renaud like they find a caravan of Muslim travelers, and they're having that conversation like, oh, should we attack them? Like, they're not like this is not like a really small caravan. Word can get out. And then Renaud was just like, just blame me. You were never here. Let's you want war, we'll start war. Like you said, they're warmongers, and they go out and they butcher, unfortunately, the innocent caravan. And this word gets to Saladin, right? So he has to respond, right? And so he
advances on Carrick.
Yeah, and so that's when, like, again, you see the difference. Like, the people are like, I feel always the poor people suffer, right? Oh, they're scrambling to get in, and like their only chance is maybe for somebody to like delay enough so they can get into the fortress. And Balian decides to basically. And he doesn't even realize, like, think about it. Like, I think when I was rewatching this, I realized that, like, he really, like, he thinks he's going to die actually here. This is it, this is, he's just doing this because he thinks it's the right thing to do. And
but he's prepared to, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously the movie continues because there's a lot left, but it's when I was rewatching, I picked up this, I guess I must have missed it last time, but he does assume that he's going to die here. And most of the other characters as well believe that. So, but actually, I like that battle. I did like that battle scene. That was interesting.
Oh, it was so good.
The music score was good too. I was like, oh, this is nice.
It was epic. It reminds you. It has that like 300 Spartan feel where it's like massive army against the little. It's like 100,000 against like 20 people. It's like basically those numbers in comparison. And so they attack, they put up a valiant effort, but then Balian essentially just gets knocked out. But you think he's going to die, but someone picks him up and he's still alive, and he realizes it's who?
It's the supposed slave he spared, but who's actually...
Yeah, it was Imad ad-Din.
Yeah, so he was a sultan, yeah.
It turns out that the man he spared initially was who we thought was a slave. Turns out he was actually the Sultan all along. And basically because of his actions, how he treated him earlier in the film, he decides to repay the debt that he spared him and allows him to basically live.
Yeah. And we did skip a scene, but I'll get back to it in a sec. So basically, he tells them, right, like, yeah, I'm sparing you, but if you go into that fortress, you'll die anyways because Saladin is here. And at the same time, King Baldwin shows up with the Christian army. And what we missed was that before they're having that debate in the right, he says send word to Balian like he needs to help defend Carrick, but we're going to march to we're going to march to Carrick with the army. And then Jeremy Irons' character tells him like you may not survive this because like you're so fragile now. But he decides to go anyways. And
as a true leader does.
And Baldwin and Saladin break bread, and they have a little, they both back off because they could have been a bloody battle there. And then he goes into the castle and he basically really punishes Renaud because like, he is the perpetrator. And it will not be the only thing that Renaud does in this movie that is, let's just say.
So Renaud is at that point put into prison, right?
Yes.
And as part of the punishment, he has to kiss the hand of the king, who's a leper, as well. Which is like, you could see his hesitation, but it's either that or he's going to die. So either way, even if Renaud lives, he's most likely going to come down with leprosy.
Yeah, I can't remember what part of the movie. Do you remember when Renaud kind of like I'm gonna say
when he what?
When he like forces, I'm gonna use the word forces himself upon Saladin's sister.
That's when he gets released.
Yeah, when he gets released, right? So we'll get there.
We're not there yet.
Like Renaud when
he's sent to jail, right?
Yeah, at
this point, yeah. And so the king is still alive, but he's weak and feeble. and Guy is basically waiting for the opportunity to take power so that he can then release Reynald to do his bidding and declare war. That's the whole sort of premise at this point.
Yeah.
But he's still abiding by time, and what ends up happening is that essentially the king passes away, and so Siegel makes a deal with Guy saying that I'll still be your loving wife if like our son becomes king, right? And so then the son becomes king, and he's sort of like the proxy king anyway. Well, like everyone,
I like that scene where like his mom is like, seal, put the seal. He doesn't know what he's doing.
yeah, he has no idea what he's doing, and his mom's basically managing the affairs, putting his interest. But what ends up happening is, as he's putting the wax on, the wax hits his hand, and he doesn't react. And then at that point, then they're like, that's sort of a clue, because when you have leprosy, you have no feeling really. And so you can't feel pain. And so then they come and get a physician in and do some tests, and there's nothing. He like pokes his foot with a needle, no response. Does some other tests, nothing. And so he's like, nah, he came down with leprosy. And so then Siegel makes the very tragic decision essentially to put her
poison her son.
To put her son out of his misery. Essentially, instead of living a life as a leper, so she kills him.
So what did you think of that? So in this movie, there's a lot of moral choices. Like there's clearly forks in the road, as they say. What did you think of her decision to do that?
It's not a decision I would have done, but it's something she felt she had to do But part of it is she also saw the what her brother had to deal with the entire time, and that must have been awful. Because he like couldn't do much, he was always weakened, and then she saw his face, and it was just completely decimated by leprosy. So you can judge her, but you really can't because you don't know what she went through with their interactions and what she saw with their brother as king.
Yeah, I mean, how I viewed it was like, I think my issue with her decision was that like in the end, you're making a choice on behalf of her son when her son is still young, and maybe he'll make, like, if he wants to end his life later, he should be allowed to. I felt like what she was doing was like being a protective mother in a sense.
Sure.
But she was also, I think it was a selfish act. Like you said, she didn't want to go through that again. So is that really her right to choose?
She didn't want to, well, I would say that, and maybe she didn't want to see her son go through that either.
Yes, but at the same time, is that really her choice?
No, I'm not saying it is, but that's just I think how she was rationalizing it.
Yeah,
because I think it was part selfish, part empathetic.
Yeah, I think that's why I like that scene and that big decision, because I think that represented her character very well. Where that she was like not as evil in the sense. I'm gonna use the word evil for Reynald.
Guy
and Guy, yeah. And
Guy. Is that how you say his name?
Yes.
Guy how do you say his full name, sir?
I don't know. Hold on, let me see if I can do it. Guy de I can't say the last name. It's Guy, yeah. Guy, you're saying it like an American, but it's Guy.
Yeah, well, I am American. I'm not French.
Yeah, me neither. The movie they say Guy the whole time, dude. They don't say Guy.
Whatever. I actually know someone named Guy, and he went by Guy.
No, it's funny. Actually, that name must have been popular once at a certain point, because I had a coworker also named Guy, and we called him Guy.
Is this in Jersey?
Yeah, I never called him Guy.
Dude, that's because the guy I knew that I went to college with, the guy named Guy that I went to college with, he was actually from New York. I think it's an East Coast thing.
Yeah, it seems to be like there must be some reason. Yeah, there's something interesting. Like I've never heard of that name until.
I had a professor whose first name was Guy as well, though.
Oh, interesting.
But he was much older.
Yeah,
he's like in late 70s or something like that.
Anyway, so going back to the movie real quick, like that her decision there, I think represented a lot of her character. Like she, at the time, was empathetic, but also you can tell that she was really spoiled through most of her life, and these were her tough decisions, not like, oh, I need to, survive.
That's not necessarily an easy decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy, but at the same time, like, I feel like she was making, like, when we say first world problems, that's what she had in a sense. It was a tough decision, but like her son would have still received probably the best care than.
Well, that's aristocratic problems. Yeah.
Yeah, like yes, it was terrible, but like there's probably a lot of other kids that had leprosy in the lower classes that were definitely not getting that medical attention that he was probably going to get as king.
Well, but there was not much medical attention that they could do at that point.
Yeah, it seemed like it was more like management, right? Like Baldwin.
It was management. There was no. It's not like, oh yeah, let me get you some antibiotics. They had no idea what that was at that point.
But around, like I said, around this part of the movie, Baldwin, before he dies, right, he does propose to Balian, like, look.
Oh yeah, that's something we did skip over.
We can get rid of Guy, basically kill him.
I know you love my sister, so kill him, and then you can marry my sister, and then you can control the army.
Yeah, and actually, and this is why I say like there's always unintended consequences, because I have no issues with Balian's decisions, right, in that moment. But like if he had known that the kid had leprosy and it could have been even more problematic, I wonder if Balian would have made a different decision.
Who knows?
Because I think Balian thought, okay, like I don't want to cost him his life, and also this kid will be king, and you know.
No, so what ends up happening? Yes, Balian makes the moral choice to not kill Guy and be, even though he really cares about Sibyl. He makes a choice not to, and says, "Nah, like I'm not gonna go through with that." And eventually, like goes and retreats back to his home village, or like the village that he's like the what do you call it, the Balian of. Wait, no, what is the position that he inherits from his father?
Oh, it's like
Barrison.
Yeah, he's like a Baron or something like that. He has some title.
Yeah, he's a Baron. Essentially, he goes back to the village that he's a ruler of.
Yeah.
And so he retreats there, and then all of that happens with all of those decisions happen with the son who became king, in that Sibyl decides to poison her son because he has leprosy. And then Guy takes reins and he frees Renault from prison. And so essentially what happens is Guy makes two decisions. He says to Renault, do what needs to be done to basically incite war. And then the second is he decides to have Balian killed because he sees Balian as a threat.
Yeah, he has assassination attempts, and that was actually another good scene. But that battle, a little like fight, and then that's also where Renault does the. Let's just say
Renault goes to a village, kills everyone there, and that happens to be where Saladin's sister lives. And so, yeah, you're kind of like left to, you don't know exactly what he does, but you know he definitely kills her.
Yeah, but I think before he does that, he definitely.
Oh no, he tells her to take off her mask.
Yeah, but it's insinuated that he.
It's insinuated.
Yeah.
I mean, well, there was a lot of that horrible act going on during those wars.
Yeah, yeah, and it's and I think later I think we see why Saladin does what he does. Anyway,
oh yeah.
But you're right. So Balian survives his assassination attempt, and he gets in. He actually, okay, this is movie stuff, right? Gets there right in time to say his piece about them moving the army away from the city, right? Because now Guy and Renault, like, they want to go full total war, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Saladin has moved his army because obviously this news has reached him. I mean, it's not like the Middle East is that big. And he tells her, like, the
Middle East is big, but where that war is, it's not that big.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That was what I was trying to say. But basically, they want to move the army right away from the city. And Balian says, don't do that because the cities are stronghold. And also moving an army in the desert is not exactly like easy.
Away from waterways.
Away, especially where you want to go, which is like deep. He even says, like, I think he even says, like, you're falling to his trap. Like, he wants you to go out there. He wants you to move. He's been waiting this whole time because like he can't move on you because it's well known, right? Sieging a city is hard, right? You need supplies and equipment, and you lose a lot of men usually because the advantage is not yours. Of course, these are brilliant military men. They're like, nah, like he has like there's like that side character. I don't know his name. I don't think he has a name, but he always says like the dumbest lines. Or like God wills it, and like a Christian knights cannot lose. It's like okay, that's definitely the way to go, you know.
Yeah.
But they use that as a pretext, like you said, to just say, look, we want our way, and they go. And then Balin catches up with the monk warrior that he respects, right? And he says, "Why are you going?" He says, "Look, I follow what my the king's the Lord's army is, and I know I'm going to my death, but I've accepted that." What do you think of his character overall? Because actually, I was actually reading a little piece leading up to our discussion, how some people interpret his character as an angel, because he has that scene where remember he fights the assassins and he disappears and it reappears. He seems like he's not really there, but he is there.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's definitely he's kind of like a minor character, right? But yeah, he does appear in certain instances almost like an angel.
Yeah.
And actually, a movie we'll be reviewing that I'm almost finished watching. We'll be reviewing has a character kind of similar to that as well, and it's sort of like that sort of biblical or religious overtone. But yeah, I know. I mean, I like this character. I don't think I don't think you've seen it yet. It's Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah, I was gonna watch it this week. Maybe actually
it's pretty
later
good
today. Because But I was gonna say So his character, because I actually this is I've done multiple viewings, but I had actually never come across that interpretation where he's an angel. Like I thought that was. And then when I rewatched some of the scenes, I was like,
yeah, you can see it. Yeah.
I could see it because like especially the one in the desert where like he's talking to him and then like Balin like looks the other way and then looks back and he's just gone. I'm like, wait. You're in the middle of the desert. There's no way you're just gone. You at least see the horse riding in the sunset or something. So I can buy that his character is like semi-real. Like he is, like maybe the whole time he was never really always there or not there. So like he maybe didn't really die in the desert, but it's almost like a figure of symbolism of like I have to go. Sometimes you're led to paths where you are led to your personal doom, but it is the way things are. It's bigger than what we. It's like the old adage, right? It's bigger than we realize, right? It's bigger than our comprehension.
Yeah.
And Balin really has a lot of respect for this monk warrior. So he's a great character too in this film. And I forgot who plays him, but I've seen him in other British films. But yeah, so Balin is left to now defend the city because they're taking the whole army. But before we get to that part, of course, as predicted, they're away from water, they're freaking thirsty, and then they're like the easiest prey to pick off in the desert. Like, I mean, that was like so predictable.
Yeah, of course.
I was like, if you're gonna be terrible at your military strategy, that's what happens. And then Saladin confronts both Guy and Renaud, right? Because he has them as prisoners, right? And this is interesting because obviously he knows what Renaud has done and savagely beheads him, basically.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't kill Guy because I think you're led to believe that the Guy is definitely getting the
no, chop. But he said a king does not kill a king.
Yeah, and then my favorite line also is that like you were under such a great king. Like, did you not learn anything from him? That must have hurt. Guy must have been like, oh my god. And then when you see like those last scenes when he's on the donkey, I mean that was great, dude. I was like that guy.
Well, we'll get to that in a bit. Yeah, but anyway, so obviously Balin is a way better strategic leader than Guy was in a million years, and so he prepares his city for the siege wisely. He sets a lot of traps. I love the marking, so that they measured out essentially how far they would be to like actually be able to hit them with their catapults.
Yeah, so they didn't want to waste. Like they were like they remember like he was saying like they take all the supplies, they take most of the troops. Like we have to maximize everything. Remember sorry to interrupt you, but he knights even like random people, and the priest says like does making random people a knight make you a better fighter? And he just says yes. I like that.
It's a great scene. No, but they go and so they lay out and they put white rocks at every say like 100 meters and be like. All right, once they get to them, like that's when you can fire. Very smart move, like on his part, and like you could definitely see Saladin thinks this is going to be an easy siege of the city. They wiped out, and it was anything but an easy siege. Yeah, because
Balin knows that like they're not going to win, but if he can get like some terms, then he can at least maybe get something out of it, right? Because Saladin, you can't blame Saladin because look, he just decimated the army, like all their forces. So he's thinking,
I mean all the momentum's in his favor.
Yeah, he's thinking like, okay, like even if like it's it's always difficult to siege a city, Like they're gonna have no king, no moral. Like they're like what's like it's probably gonna be like a day or two. That's what he was probably thinking. But obviously, he learned the hard way. And I think I mean it's over dramatized in this film, but I do know that historically speaking, the real life Balian, who actually by the way did not have an affair with Sybil, by the way. That's like a fictional thing, but he did. Yep. He is known as like the defender of the city during that time period, and it was not like an easy siege for Saladin. So he actually had to agree terms in a degree, but he got to retake the city, right? But yeah, that battle sequence was pretty awesome. Where like you're right, the markers, and then like the
it was great. No, it was great. And so then they get to the barrier where they're at their wall, and they have those big towers where they basically lower the gates and just let the people onto the city, the fighters. But what they didn't count on is they were waiting for them to come and have the towers basically breach the city wall, all to be shot and taken down with counterweights and burned basically all of the buildings. And so that at that moment, once that happened, Saladin knew that that it was not going to be easy, like by any means. But one of the best scenes is when you see them put the Islamic flag on to the marker, and then Balian goes over, fights, and does everything in his power to take it down. And
yeah, that was like over the top. That was good. Also, like speaking of comedic, I like this side character, this priest gets a lot of lines during the end, right? Where in the beginning, he criticizes Balian for the knighting, and then he also says, we should just flee, and Balian says, "What about
what about the people?" He's
like, but at the end when he's
hold on. Before that, what does he say? He's like, "Oh, well, the people. I mean, they'll be going to heaven, but we can't worry about them or something like that."
Yeah, no, like, okay. and it's typical. God's will, right? But I like how the end.
It's always God's will if it's in His favor.
Yeah, but what I find funny is
the end was the best. That line, I was just like, "You scumbag." He's like, "Oh, when they go to negotiate the lines, when he tells them, oh yeah, he's gonna ask to just convert and then ask for forgiveness later."
I was like, that's so realistic. It's like that's a typical like corrupt priest, like
slimy, dude.
Like when he had a chance to get out, I think he was gonna survive. Oh, like we can forget about the people, but then like, oh, we have a chance. It's our last opportunity. Do whatever, dude. Do whatever. We'll ask for forgiveness forever. Because he thinks like he's like a priest, right? He's thinking like they're gonna ask for religious terms, and like you have to all convert. When like I think that's also one of the film was trying to highlight is that like there was, like I said, the religion was the politics, right? But the semantics sometimes was just, can you just leave because we want the city, right? Because obviously he wants the city for religious purpose, and we'll get to that scene in a second.
Yeah. We'll get
but rewinding back, I think Sybil tells Balian, I think that's another important scene where like she says, my brother's kingdom is gone, and Balian tells him his brother's kingdom was like in the mind and in the heart, that it was not a physical place.
We'll get that in a second, but the last point before they negotiate terms was after that they knocked down all those towers, and so then Saladin's army couldn't. Their first mode of penetrating the wall, basically pushing those towers and going up top, wasn't going to work. So then they're like, all right, how can we breach this wall? And they both, Balian and Saladin, his advisors, recognize a weak point in the wall. They're like, we need to take it here. And so they pummel that point of the wall, but Balian's armies basically set a trap for them, where it's a very narrow area and they can't move anywhere else, and so it's just a massacre. It's really good tactics by Balian at that point. It's
the oldest tactics in the book. It's the same thing like we mentioned earlier.
He set a trap. You basically bait them into taking that potential breaching point, and you set a trap there.
Yeah, and also what I mean is that it's the basic military. I don't want to say 101, but like the in 300 they did the same thing where you have a larger army, but you really narrow how fast the flow is. You're really just fighting on even terms until like you're exhausted and you can't. Like the only thing they have now is just more numbers they can throw, but they don't want to like lose like a third of their army. So Saladin, that's why he's able. So Balian's credit in that final battle is that he is able to get to terms with Saladin because Saladin knows that if I want to take the city, I might have to lose half my army here because I can
more.
Yeah, I have to go through this wall, and I'll eventually by sheer numbers I will have enough fresh legs to get.
Well, what is
at what cost? Right?
Is the price? Is the price of taking the city and losing like no one there is standing basically at the end? Is that worth it? And it's not Saladin because he's smart. He knows he can get it. It's just going to cost him a hell of a lot, and more than he's willing to sacrifice.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read any books in depth about him, but what I have read at a superficial level is that he understood that even when he
Saladin was a brilliant military mind as well.
Even when he reconquered Jerusalem, he knew that this wouldn't be the last Christian crusade, so he couldn't really afford to just throw everything like some of his advisors wanted to, right? And
because God always wills it.
Yeah, because it's true. There would be a third crusade.
Okay, so I didn't realize this. Do you know who actually played King Baldwin?
No, who?
Edward Norton.
Wow, I
did not know that. Sorry, that just came across with the cast. I was like, wow. All right, it figures why I like the acting of the priest as well, or the king as well.
This is
this is a
loaded cast, an underrated performance, because I just said it was really the one part of Genius I didn't see the face, but the body language was perfect to portray his point, his mood swings. I was like, of course, Edward Norton would know how to do that perfectly. It's you don't even see his face ever, but he's perfect body language, a typical top level actor.
I really like the actor who played Saladin's character as well.
Yeah, he was great. He was great too, and he has again it's funny. It's ironically so my favorite scene is with Edward Norton, and my second favorite scene is the one at the end where he says,
okay, so let's get to that point since it's a great scene, right? They're negotiating terms, and he basically tells, basically they negotiate and be like, all right, if you leave, or we don't care about the city. If you let us all leave peacefully, and he's like, we'll give you the city of Jerusalem. But then he also says, he's like, how do I know that? He says something like, "Oh, how do I know that I can trust you?" That's what Balin asked him, and he's like, I honor my words, unlike basically he was alluding to your people, your leaders, right? And so and it's true, he lets him. But before that, he's like, "What is Jerusalem to you?" And so since it's your favorite line, you can quote it.
Yeah, but before we get to there, he does also say you're back to your honor your word. I thought that was an important line where he says when the Christians took this city, they killed every Muslim, and he was like, I'm not, I am not, we are not them, right? And then you're right, it's an interesting how Saladin separating himself from the savagery of what normally happens.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a
bit of civility during this moment.
Yeah, but yeah, that is my second favorite scene where Balin does ask him, Saladin, what is Jerusalem to you? And he says, Jerusalem is nothing. But then he turns around and says but it's also everything. And I think that line also
nothing. And then he pauses. He's like, everything.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that was a good line.
And I think it's also a good line because it is true, right? Even in a modern sense, where as a place, it's no different than any other place. But at the same time, it means
it's a symbol, dude, is what it is. And because it has such deep-rooted history within religious traditions of Islam and Christianity, it is very contentious because it's contentious today in today's politics, which is 15 years after this film came out, where the Trump administration wanted to recognize Jerusalem as the official capital of Israel. Right, that was very contentious movement in world politics, and specifically in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, and what's interesting is that's really all, like you said, we're highlighting that it's by itself, it shouldn't mean much because, okay, they're recognizing it, but symbolically that means a lot, and it really pissed off a lot of people.
Hugely, man! That was a move that really infuriated world leaders all over and religious leaders.
Yeah, so it's still to this day, but yeah, that was a great line.
Subject, yeah.
It's a great line.
Well, it's true because it's not that the city itself, right? It's what it represents as basically the birthplace of all these religious traditions.
Yes, and it's my second favorite scene in the movie. If it's short, but it's really good.
Oh, this is so good. That was a good line. Yeah. Nothing. Everything.
Yeah, and then another line that we didn't go over that I like. So there's basically three lines that I like in this movie where Balin, I forgot who he's talking to. I think he's talking to Jeremy Irons' character. He says if it's not a kingdom of conscience, it's a kingdom of nothing. I like that line too. That was a great line. There's a lot of great lines in this movie that people are going to be surprised on our rating because of the film itself, but I think
Mhm.
my tastes have upgraded, and
No,
also
it was like in terms of watchability, it's great. It's just too long to watch often.
yeah, and I guess to wrap up to the ending. Sorry, before we wrap up to the ending, yeah. So I have three favorite scenes, right? It's the Baldwin and Balian chess scene. It's that one with the Kingdom of Conscience, and then the last one is the one I like the most is the Saladin Balian scene. But yeah, so to wrap up real quick, they secure passages back to Europe, and Sybil and Balian go back to France, and then on their way back to move, like Balian doesn't want to actually stay in the town he grew up in. They cross Richard the Lionheart, who asks him like, and the movie ends kind of how it begins, right? Like, he basically tells him the route to Jerusalem, and just says, I'm on my way, and because like Richard the Lionheart wanted to recruit, him to this third crusade. Yeah, this third crusade was basically three people: him, Barbarossa, and I forgot the third guy. But basically, this was like the legendary Third Crusade, which had the best supposedly generals, like kings, but Barbarossa drowns before he gets there, and I think only Richard the Lionheart gets there. So it is very like it ends with a kind of like for Balian, it's his arc is over, but like you see that like kind of like what Saladin suspected, right? The Crusades are not over.
Yep. I mean, it's kind of the ending you kind of expect. Because at the end, you even see Balian's like, it's the at this point, who's going through are the knights from England, right? And that's sort of how they end it. It's like, oh, do you know the way to Jerusalem?
Yeah.
I am the king of England. It's like, oh, here we go again. It's the third crusade. And then it's the fourth crusade.
Yeah.
And these people, Europe, for some reason, just loved war during this time period.
Yeah, it's those crusades, the Holy Land, it's the religious zeal.
Europe is just a region of just war throughout the centuries.
Yeah, it's a quagmire. It's a lot of people in a small density with limited resources they have to fight over. But I think the obsession with the Holy Land is because, naturally speaking, if you look at like the great empires before the rise of our modern religions, controlling the Mediterranean was how you controlled trade, right? And so places like Damascus, Acre, I guess, other port cities, Cairo, they were important strategically. I mean, the Romans dominated that, and it was important for them to dominate. Like, there's a reason why the Roman Empire, like, they get into like further, but like really they only cared about controlling the Mediterranean and North Africa, because if you control the Mediterranean, you kind of control all trade routes. But so I think there's a push. There's also a geopolitical push, but I think the religious push was like, like it was just a perfect combination.
I think they use the religious aspect as a guise for geopolitical strategy.
Yeah, I mean, knowing how religious these popes are, definitely. At the time, are you kidding? They only care about
the money, man,
and the power. Yeah. So, yeah, I think. Is there any other scenes that I know we probably missed some, but I feel like we covered the ones I wanted to cover. So I don't know if there's.
I think that's pretty much it. I mean, we gave a good overview of the film. Yeah. So, is there anything you didn't like about the film specifically? Since we didn't really talk about that a whole lot.
Yeah. So I guess we'll do a little tangent on that before we get into ratings. I guess for me, having watched this now probably for the third or fourth time, I can't remember. I know this is definitely like the second time with the director's cut. There were parts where I was like, so going back to where he's working the land, I was like, wow, this is a lot longer than I remember. Like,
very long.
let's move that along. The beginning felt okay, even with the extra scenes. When we're like any scene with King Baldwin felt good, like it was fine. I did feel like the Sybil Balian relationship was, when I read that it was kind of fictionalized, I was like, that definitely feels right, because it felt like kind of, honestly, it felt kind of out of nowhere. I was like, okay, so she just meets the guy and already like, oh, I want to be with him. Like, oh, you don't know anything about the guy. Like, that seems, and you're all from different social classes too. That seems very.
Well, not anymore. He's moved up. Moved on up.
No, it's more like she moved down. Anyways, there was like kind of like I understand for the mechanics of the story, maybe have it like it happens, right? You have to push it along, as they say. But
Mhm.
I feel like I didn't. Maybe it was. I think they had the relationship just to have that moral decision with the marriage for Balian, for that to highlight the, um, do you do a little evil for greater good? Like Sybil says, right? You'll regret not doing a little evil for for a greater good.
Mhm.
But besides that, I did feel like the relation that was the whole point of the relationship was for that moment and that scene. And I'm not a big fan of that just because like it feels like you're trying to orchestrate, plot points versus like having a cohesive story and tight lit script that feels like organic where I'm not questioning that. And yeah, I mean, I have issues with the over idealism, but look, it's Hollywood and there's only so much I can expect from these guys. Now, if this was an indie film that did this, I would be like, oh, but big money where there's a lot of studio heads. And look, we already know a bit of the inside side of like cutting, making films a certain length, making films about certain topics, only approving. Now it's even worse, right? Because now they have to make scripts that will be approved in Beijing as well as Hollywood. So now it's like,
Yep. I mean,
scripts,
there you
these
go.
scripts are so vanilla now where honestly, I'm actually surprised that Ridley Scott got the budget to do this.
Yeah, I mean, so this, since you're sort of touching upon some of that, and like, yeah, it's just really interesting in filmmaking because we as an audience don't really know the politics that go on beyond a lot of the decisions as to like how like the length, what to keep, what you can't keep, stuff like that. I know you sent me I think we've talked about this like several times before, but you sent me a clip from, oh my gosh, he's from your
Smith,
area.
Kevin
Yeah,
Smith.
Kevin Smith, who basically he was supposed to, he was being approached about directing a Superman movie in the late 90s. And he was super excited, had this vision, but his producer, basically, he had meetings with, had different ideas and wanted Superman to fight a giant mechanical spider. And he's like, what? And he's like, yeah, he's like, and he just wouldn't let that go. And so basically, it was just enough where he's like, you know what? Like, you just want to hijack my vision for this movie. He's like, so he dropped it, basically. Because I'm sure these people, as directors, it's just all politics, right? Because you're dealing with studio heads, you're dealing with independent producers, you're dealing with all of these forces, and everyone wants their say in a film. And I think that's sometimes when you see a film, it's like, and that wasn't that great. It's probably because it may have been good if it was just up to the director's vision initially.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the mechanical. Oh, and for those of you in the audience that don't know, that mechanical spider was actually featured in the movie Wild Wild West, and that was produced by the same dude who wanted the mechanical spider.
And the Superman movie, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah. I don't know all the internal politics for this film, and every film has this probably. The editing, cutting, the script
Mm-hmm.
phase. But it does feel like just going off like how the original movie was cut, and shown in theaters. It seemed like there was definitely the big studios just wanted this to be like they probably wanted to milk the good feeling and momentum that Lord of the Rings was having with all those like
Sure.
big
This is only like 2-3 years after.
yeah, and so I have a feeling that they just cared about that, and they didn't really care about any of the other little intricacies that Ridley Scott was trying to put into film. If you disagree with his idealism or not, because there's actually a lot of other scenes that are just like taken out, and you're like, that was an important scene, but okay. Because in the end, they just care about the bottom line. So
the money, man.
Yeah.
That's all they cared about. Yeah, for me, it was really the insane over idealism really got to me after a while, especially after I would say about the 10th time that they greeted each other with Aslam Salaikum, basically the Arabic greeting. I'm like, okay, now you're just going to like,
they say it all the time in the movie.
It's like, yeah, by the 10th time, I was like, okay, now you're just getting like a little like overly ridiculous with it, right? Because you're trying to, there's one thing in trying to state like how the world should be in your mind. And if you're saying, because we're all part of that same, we should all get along. Okay, that's fine. But do it in a more subtle way. It was just like overly preachy. And that, I've seen plenty of films like that to me, and that just kind of rubs me the wrong way after a while. Because in the end, this is a period piece, so you have to have some historical accuracy in my mind with it for me to like be okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely fictionalized. My recommendation to the audience is to not view this film like as a historical piece. but more as like a adaptation of
of real life events.
how we, the modern world, but sometimes wished maybe the Crusades had kind of gone in a
And
sense.
Ben,
Yeah,
yeah.
but
And it tends to be an over, at least the way I've seen Crusades portrayed, and this is not including Monty Python because that's just overly right? Aside from that, they tend to just portray, a lot of the Christian Crusaders as absolute savages, and there was a lot of that went on. But like I said earlier, that kind of went along both sides. It's not like a lot of the Islamic soldiers were necessarily less brutal, right? There was a lot of violent acts going on during these wars on both sides.
Yeah. All right, want to get into ratings? I can go first.
Sure, you can go first.
Yeah, I'm coming in at 6.5 out of 10. I think this movie hasn't aged well because like I when I do like rewatches, so to give some context, when I pick films, I try to mix it between films I haven't seen and I want to see, and then films I think will be really good topics because I think this actually had a lot of interesting topics, especially that we're probably not going to discuss the Crusades in a long time on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt at times actually pretty bored on certain scenes, especially when he's working the land in the beginning. And then there's just other random scenes where I'm just like, this is like boring. Like we didn't even talk about Guy's a little escapade with this random woman. I was just like, okay, like that's in the director's.
Well, he's just mad, but that was very quick. So I was like, okay, basically he was just a jealous and angry.
Yeah, and well, it just seemed like this film had great battle scenes, but I've seen better. And it's and I think your point, something that I've noticed with our own society, especially in the Western culture, is that we're moving more towards not just nuance, definitely more nuance for sure than before, but I think also we personally I think grew up in the age of what I call the anti-hero, where we like stories that really reflect. There's nothing wrong with idealism, but we know that era of
that people aren't perfect.
that rampant like era of like maybe the late 70s, 80s of like optimism and like idealism is over. And like I think we're like, especially we cover like more like recent films, let's say from 2015 onward. I think I've noticed that their films are a little more nuanced and a little more like dark in their nature.
What do you mean, Chris? You didn't enjoy the Die Hard series?
Okay. Yeah, the greatest Christmas movie ever made. So yeah, I'm going with 6.5 because I feel like this movie is actually hasn't aged well, but at the same time, I give it, if there was more movies of this ilk, of this period, I would probably even give it a lower, but it looks like that's not coming anytime soon. So it's going to stay here for a while. So I'm going to stick with 6.5 just for the period piece it's doing.
Yeah. So in light of that, I guess one thing that you have to know when watching this film is this film came out in 2005. And I think we sort of forget what was going on in the climate as a society in the U.S. during that time period. But just for people who may be a bit younger who are watching this, the U.S. was in a very tense. I mean, we had been in the Iraq War for 2 years up to that point. We were still very scarred by the events of 9/11. There's a lot of, I would say, bad sentiments against the Middle East during that time point in the minds of many, especially in the minds of politicians here, right? So this was sort of also a response to what would be some Islamic world sentiment here, right? And so I think that's sort of what was partly driving Ridley Scott. I think if he had made the film today, it might not necessarily be the case. He wouldn't be so overly preachy. But in light of the events of 9/11 and the wars that were happening during that time, that sort of is a response, the precedent for like his commentary in the film. At least that's how I sort of viewed it. That being said, I didn't like the over like preachiness of the film. I don't have any issue with the message. I think he could have just toned it down a bit, right? Tends to happen a bit, like even like when we were reviewing what was your French film several weeks ago?
That
That
was a long time ago.
Belle de Jour. Yeah, in that movie, it's just like I remember clearly because it was the complete antithesis of subtlety when the main character is just staring at a wheelchair, and then his wife asks him, "Why are you staring at the wheelchair?" "I don't know. I'm just drawn to it." Okay, like you couldn't be like any more like any less subtle than that. So there's ways of sort of screenwriting and trying to inject certain messaging in a much more subtle way that tend to come off more powerful to me. And so, like, I give the film a knock for that reason. I also thought that certain sequences were very slow, specifically what you cited. It really didn't add much to the film when he goes back and builds up his community. I mean, I get it, but you could have done that in a third of the time, right, with a couple scenes. But they, for some reason, wanted to drag that part out. And at a 3-hour-long movie, you need to basically make sure that every scene that you include is there for a specific reason. At least that's how I feel, because otherwise you're gonna like lose the audience members' attention. I thought overall the acting was pretty good. This cast was just unbelievable, which obviously like helps the film quite a bit. I did like the King's performance. I didn't realize it was played by Edward Norton, and he was a minor character, and yet that guy is just crazy talented actor. It's one of my favorites. Trying to think, is there anything else that I had issues with? Yeah, I would say that's about it. This is a movie you could watch and like be like really enjoy, but I don't think I am going to be rewatching this movie based on its length. Just because it's almost 3 hours long, the rewatchability of this film is really sort of hindered in my mind. Right, it's a little shorter than Lord of the Rings, but not much. And I personally like Lord of the Rings more than this, partly because of the nostalgia factor that I kind of grew up with that film. So yeah, based on all that, I would give this movie a 6.5. And in hindsight, I don't know what I was thinking with two other films that I need to sort of readjust. I would probably, in retrospect, I would have put Sunshine at a 6 and Absentia at a 5.5. Just readjusting those two film ratings.
Yeah, well, it's not
because I did think that this film was better than those two.
All right, well, the only long-time listeners are gonna know that because in the description of the other one, it's not gonna be showing that.
I know, no, and that's fair, but I mean, because yeah, I tend to give some benefit of the doubt with certain films, but in hindsight, I mean, I can't justify putting this film at the same ratings as like those two, or even lower.
I do Sunshine in this one. I think I gave Sunshine a 7, which was high, but it's they're probably like.
I can't do that.
I guess to me, those films, in my opinion, at least for me, like Sunshine and this Kingdom of Heaven are kind of like the same ballpark. Where like I watched it, not a bad film, but it's like I'm not blown away, like you said. Like I'm not like, oh, this is like my top 10 of the year. Yeah.
It's you can't put this in the same realm of Coherence or Burning.
No, not even.
No, not even close.
not even close. I mean, it's hard. I mean, like, we're almost at the end of the year. I'm actually curious to do my own, like, what movies that I see this year that I thought were, like, really good. But then I don't want to tip my hand because there's some movies that I have watched recently that I'm potentially going to put in the podcast. So we'll see.
Yeah, let's see.
But, yeah, I agree. I have no qualms. I think each of our scores, we have our own kind of criteria in our head. So it's just a film that's, like, it's not bad. It's not great. I think what gives it the extra shine is just the kind of like the setting. I think that is what separates it a bit in the sense that like there's just I try to look up other movies like you said, and there's not many around this time period. And like you said, we're not going to count Monty Python just because that's a different genre.
Although I won't hate. I personally Monty Python. Those movies always crack me up.
They're really funny, but I think I did find some other ones, but they're like really old. They're like in the 50s and stuff. So there's not something that a lot of studios / directors want to tackle, and I think it's because it is still very.
It's very complicated too, right? Yeah. Like that was a long. It's not like it was a short event in history. It's not like it was World War II, 5 to 6 years. That's it. No, these were stretched out like hundreds of years.
Yeah. So I think
right. And like people usually think of the Crusades as in the Crusades going into the Middle East, into Israel. there were also crusades that actually went into like the Balkan or the Baltic states and up north. So like Europe just loved to fight no matter where they went and try to spread Christianity.
Yeah, so I think we've pretty much covered it. I think our scores make sense to each of us. So.
Yep. I had to readjust those two ratings. Hold on one second. For some reason, my alarm just went off. I had to readjust my 2 ratings because of that reason, though. Because I personally, I felt like this film to me was better than the other 2 that I readjusted. So, like, I don't know. I feel like we're all sort of biased, and we try to like.
No,
within our ratings, we try to be consistent and adjust. But there's always some that you look back and it's like, I probably wouldn't. In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have rated it that high or low. It happens.
I mean, we're doing the scores in real time in many ways. Yeah. But yes, there's biases. I think now that we're almost like 30 episodes in, I see that there's certain films that you tend to like a little bit more than I do, for sure. Like, I think we're gonna hit a film soon that like you're gonna rate probably like potentially 2 points higher than me. So
what film is that?
We'll get there when we get to that week. But there's films that I know that eventually I will pick, and I'm gonna probably say 9.5, and you'll probably give it like at best a 7. I just foresee it because there's certain films that like I just when they talk about.
Well, I don't know. There are some films that we are just like 100% like we agree on.
That's true, but I'm a foreseeing. Eventually, we'll have to hit some movies, right? Like it seems like. So I for people who don't know, I do most of the like editing and uploading for now. Mm-hmm. And I do try to like a spreadsheet of like I shared it with you, the spreadsheet of the scores. And I see that like there's some deviation, but there's never like I'm a 7, you're
I'm a 10.
Yeah, or you're a 10, or 9.5. I want to say.
But you see that happening in the future?
Maybe, but I mean I see like right now the biggest gap has been like at best is the Absentia one, but let's say that's an anomaly.
That's an anomaly, and we both rated that like really poorly for our respective scores.
Yeah, but for the most part, it's like always within a point or 1.5 to a 1 point of like the deviation. But I'm looking for like that. You're a 9.
You want the I'm not impressed. I'm very impressed.
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting. That's gonna be an interesting end to an episode. Yeah. So, but for right now, it seems like it's always within a point and a point or 1.5, and that's never enough to be like, oh wait, I really disagree. Like if it got to the point it was like 9 and you were, let's say 5 or 6, like that could be some interesting. That'd be an interesting end of a podcast episode. So, but I think like once again we're tied for scores. So, but we'll see what happens in the future episodes. But yeah, I agree. Like this film is problematic in many ways, but nothing that we haven't. It gets in the same tier, like you said, of like a Sunshine or whatever. Like you can watch it, but at the same time, like,
I put it more around Sunshine. Which, yeah, in retrospect, that there's only with Absentia, the only good thing was that last 10 minutes of that movie, and that was about it. And like one other scene. That's why it had to be the lowest.
Yeah, that's on you for giving it like whatever you wanted to give it. I gave it.
I gave it like a 6 or 6.5.
Yeah. So
in retrospect. Like I can't give it like your rating, or I can't justify giving it a 3.5, given that it was the director's first film, and he did do some really interesting things within it. It's just there were so many gaps within it that you can really give it a very high score.
My stance. I don't care if it's your first film or your budget's $2. I expect greatness. So yeah, that's my.
Yeah, I mean, Coherence is a small budget, and you're like amazing film.
Yeah, I was like, no qualms giving this like all the praise it deserves. It's so close to Absentia. I was like, I don't know what you're thinking with that. Like, don't make excuses for these high ego directors.
These ratings.
Yeah, but yeah.
Also, I finished watching his like Netflix film, so you know how you're kind of biased by certain things. And he actually did a very good job with Hunting at Hill House. So yeah, I think I was a little bit biased. I was like, oh, very good during that. And then, like, I tended to justify a little bit more. It happens. But, yeah, anyway, so if you enjoyed or do you have any final thoughts, Chris?
No, I was going to say we can tell our listeners to like and subscribe, and please tune in next week.
Yeah, exactly. So if you enjoyed our commentary on the film and just social commentary in general, just please like and subscribe to our film. And stay tuned. Next week, we will be reviewing probably our most modern film up to date. It's a 2020 film, Possessor, and I'm sure we're going to have some very interesting discussions revolving around the themes of that film as well. So stay tuned.